Hey, welcome back to The Strong Her Way. I'm Alicia, and today's episode is going to be a little different. What you're about to hear is an actual sneak peek inside one of our Fit and Fueled group coaching calls. And I'm sharing it because the topic is one I think every single client needs to hear, whether you're in the program or you're not there yet. We're talking about the behavior triad, which really is centered on identity, mindset, and then, of course, behavior. And why trying harder is almost never the answer to making change actually stick. If you've ever found yourself cycling on and off, starting over every other week with a new program or a new diet, or just white knuckling your way through a routine that starts to fall apart the second life gets hard, this episode is for you. It's not a willpower problem. It's really a systems problem or kind of an architecture problem. And we're going to talk about how to fix it. All right, let's dive in. Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's call. I am thrilled to kind of bring you this topic because it really is taking behavior change and breaking it down into three specific phases or sections or layers, however you want to look at it. And I think the way that we're going to be addressing like habit change and this idea of like how do we actually start to implement different behavior without burning ourselves into the ground just trying harder, because I think for a lot of us, at least for a long time, that really is the way that we go about change is like, let's just try harder. Let's just have more willpower. We just need to be more disciplined. And when we approach change from just that place, we end up usually burning ourselves out because that's not actually how the brain wires for long term lasting change. So, while that attempt or that approach rather might work for a little while, oftentimes there's going to be a point where that system breaks down. Life gets busy. Maybe you have a hard day, you go on a vacation. Maybe you're just more stressed or more tired, or you move or you change jobs. It could be really any variety of things and any magnitude of things. It's not like it always has to be these big life things that can knock us off course when we're approaching lifestyle change from that place. It could be just those small little things like you have a rough conversation or you don't sleep good. And then the next thing you know, you're not making the decisions you want to be making. You're making the decisions that feel most familiar, most comfortable, the easiest decision for your brain in the moment. And I want you to know that this cycle of doing it that way is not like a you problem. It's maybe the way that we're approaching it. It's that we're not addressing some of the root causes. And so today I want to dive in and show you a different approach. Really, this is like the strong her way to creating long-term lasting changes. And this is an approach that's not going to require you to white knuckle your way through every single decision. It really is just kind of figuring out, okay, how does my brain wire for change, knowing yourself a little bit as a person, and then how do we take all of those things and put it together? So again, a lot of times the message that we're hearing, especially kind of in the fitness space, the health space, I guess really any of the spaces, it could be business, it's willpower, it's motivation. It's just like doing more and trying harder. And it's this idea that if you want it badly enough, then you'll just like grit your teeth and grind your way until you get the results. Now, the problem with that model is that willpower is a finite resource and it gets depleted with every single decision or every time that the willpower is being used. You can kind of think of it like a muscle, right? It's like every rep you do is like slowly fatiguing the muscle, which over time we can expand the muscle strength, the size, and things like that. And so potentially over time, willpower also could expand, but usually there's like a big breakdown before that happens. Motivation, if we're just relying on when we feel motivated to make a change, that is unreliable. That can ebb and flow, maybe depending on the time of the month, depending on what else is going on in your life. For me, I know a lot of times at sleep, it's like if I don't sleep good, I don't feel super motivated to get up and go work out. So the problem is that neither willpower or relying on motivation or just like sheer determination has a system attached or a system built into that. And so when we build our entire approaches on either of those things, we're just like one little slip up from that whole entire approach kind of crumbling beneath our feet and then feeling like we're starting all over from scratch again. Now, there's another problem that can surface through this, and maybe in other areas it doesn't get talked about a lot, but I definitely know inside of the coaching that we're doing in here, inside the Strong Her Way, that all or nothing thinking pattern is really a lot of times what's driving all of this behavior. So it's either, we're on track, we're nailing it, we're killing it, or we're completely off track. And we're either doing it right or we're blowing it. We're either crushing it or we're failing. And when we're thinking in that black and white way, there really is no room for there to be neutral middle ground. And it can be one of the main reasons that long-term lasting change ends up not sticking. Because if we can't do the whole workout, then doing none of it seems like the better approach. Or, I didn't eat perfectly at breakfast, so I guess like we'll just write today off and we'll start over tomorrow. So if willpower and motivation and that all or nothing thinking is not the answer and is actively working against us, then how do we create change? What actually works? Okay, so I want to kind of just share a little bit about an aha and epiphany that I had, because I think that it's going to help kind of solidify and sort of click some things into place for you. So there was definitely a time in my fitness journey where exercise was like one more thing on the to-do list. It was kind of this thing that I had to do, a box to check. And there was a point in my relationship with exercise that if I missed a workout, I felt incredibly guilty. If I had to modify or scale it for whatever reason, I kind of felt like I was cheating. If the kids got sick or life got in the way for a week, then it felt like I was starting all over again from scratch. Now, what kind of shifted for me to where it didn't become this thing that I felt like I was always having to try really hard at doing was when there was this quiet sort of internal change about how I thought of myself and exercise. So that relationship there. It wasn't like, boom, there's this like moment where this shifted into place. It was really looking at it hindsight, but it became less of something that I had to do. And I had this idea or this thought at one point where I was thinking about, why does it feel so much easier now to do my workouts, even at the end of the day? Even if, I'd rather just go sit on the couch because I've been like going nonstop. And I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place to scale or to pivot if that's what's needed. But I think sometimes we can use those moments as a reason to just let ourselves off the hook. And what came up for me was what shifted was when it's like movement is just something I do in some way every day. Like I just move my body every single day in some way. And having that belief, having that thought, it's attached to an identity or a self concept, right? Like I'm just somebody that moves every day. But there's also a little bit of sort of that open-ended where it doesn't have to be, I run 10 miles every single day. This strength workout every single day or 5 times a week. It's like just in some way I move my body, whether that's a walk, whether that's doing mobility work, whether that's doing, a prescribed workout, cardio, strength training, whatever it is. And when that identity piece kind of clicked, that's when it was less about willpower, less about motivation. And it's just is a byproduct or an effect of me being somebody who moves my body every single day. Now, that shift did not happen overnight. It did not come from like just sheer willpower, but it really came from those moments of showing up for myself consistently and doing the workout on some days where maybe I didn't feel like it, even if it was a fraction of the workout. And so that is really, what this behavior triad is all about that we're going to talk about today is sort of this different internal architecture of creating change, really using identity, using our thought work and those mental reframes, but then also the behavior and actually doing the action. We're going to see that it's not just one of those pieces, but how all three of those pieces work together and play together to help us create those long-term behavior changes, habits that we maybe have been trying to create for years. So I want to kind of give you a little hack to speed that process up a little bit. It's really is if I would have known this 20 years ago, then I wouldn't have had to trial and error my way to it. So let's kind of dive into the framework today that can really reframe for you how you're thinking about change. And we're going to just call it the behavior triad. There's three elements, and all three really are required for lasting change. They don't necessarily work in a nice, clean, straight, linear line, but I want you to think of it more as like in a loop, or potentially even there's times where they're going to cross and it might not fully make sense, but as long as we have all three ingredients, behavior change becomes so much easier. So those three elements we've already kind of touched on is identity. We're going to call it mindset. So that's the thought and brain work, and then behavior. So let's walk through each one of them and then we'll talk about how they all work together. So let's dive into identity. So this is really the stories that we carry about ourselves. It's by default, it's not necessarily who we want to be, but it's who we are, how we see ourselves in our own minds in this moment. Now, the great news is we can, of course, work to edit those stories and alter those stories, but whatever story you believe about yourself right now is kind of your current identity. And that's the identity that's really responsible for driving the subconscious behavior that is creating most of the results that you have in your life. Now, the thing about identity is that it is really one of the most powerful predictors of our behavior because we naturally tend to act in ways that are consistent with who we believe we are. So, if we're somebody who believes that we always fall off track, you will always either find ways to quote unquote fall off track, or you will put yourself in situations that lead you to falling off track because it's going to your brain is like looking for ways to confirm that belief, that identity, because it doesn't like when there's resistance between what is real, like what's actually happening, and what it believes should be happening. So it's just kind of keeping that in mind. If you are somebody who is, it's like, I just hate meal prepping, or I just can't figure this out. You will subconsciously find ways, like meal prepping is going to always feel like this bigger thing, or you will subconsciously always find ways to sabotage yourself, or again, to just kind of confirm that identity. This is not because it's a character flaw on your behalf. It's not because you're weak. It's because your behavior is trying to confirm the identity, the story underneath of it. Now, the flip side is equally true. So we have kind of the default story that we all sort of come with through years of watching things, observing our brain writing stories to help us make sense of the world around us. The exciting thing is that we can also go in and alter those stories. We can decide to believe other things. We can decide to tell our brains and tell ourselves other new things about us. So when you start to genuinely see yourself as being someone who takes care of her body, someone who fuels herself well, someone who is consistent, even if it's imperfect, then your behavior starts to follow that identity as well, almost automatically without you really even having to try. Now, it's not going to happen perfectly, but it will start to happen consistently over time. Now, here is the part that I want you to kind of cling to today is that you do not have to believe this new identity fully before you start. The research behind behavior change and how identity plays a role in that actually supports this idea that small repeated behaviors begin building that new identity before you're consciously feeling like that person. So this is where, yes, it matters the story that we're telling ourselves, the story that we're believing. It also matters what are the actions that we're taking. Are we deliberately taking actions, even if they're small, that support this identity? So this is where they're kind of working back and forth together. It's not like the identity has to always come first and then the actions, or the actions, and then the identity, it's kind of where they're working together. So those repeated behaviors begin building your new identity before you feel like that person. It's the action that is coming first in some situations, and then the identity catches up, or vice versa. They build on each other. Now, let's talk a little bit about that second pillar. This is the mindset. So both the background stories running beneath awareness and the active thought work in the moment. That's what we're going to be referring to as mindset, is that we have those stories that are a lot of times happening subconsciously. Sometimes we're aware. And then there's like actively kind of interrupting or bringing new thoughts into the mix, right? So this is where we start to notice, what am I thinking right now? Okay, is this deliberate? Is this intentional? Or is this just kind of one of those automatic stories? And how do we want to kind of step in and maybe interrupt that pattern? So mindset is kind of the middle layer. It is the most dynamic of the three because it is working in those two areas at one time, right? It's the automatic stories that we have, and then it's the intentional thought work that we're doing. At the deeper level, so this is sometimes the quieter level in our brain, this is those background stories that we carry from things that we learn in our families of origin, society, maybe things that were said or spoken over us. These are the ones that we may not ever fully be aware of. A lot of times when clients are telling me a story, they are saying it so naturally and so like automatically, like it's just the news. This is just the fact of the world, the fact of who I am. And it's not usually until somebody kind of points out, hey, this is like a story. This is part of a story that we have, or part of a program that your brain is running. Let's kind of examine this thought a little bit more. There's things that we're maybe not fully aware of. Again, it might sound just like, I'm just not someone who's very disciplined. I always end up quitting, I just like, I can never be on time, whatever it is, right? So just start paying attention to those things. I've never been able to stick to anything long term. It sounds like you're telling me a fact of who you are, but really this is just a story that's been reinforced through action, right? Because remember, those two work back and forth. These stories live very close to our identity or our self-concept, and then they quietly shape our behavior before we're even making a conscious decision. So it's kind of as like that knee-jerk response. Now, at the surface level, mindset would be viewed as the active thought work that we are putting in practice moment by moment. So this is where we're catching that all or nothing thinking before we have a chance to spiral or before it takes over. This is maybe where we are noticing our thoughts or noticing that little voice that's whispering, we blew it, and then choosing to not like completely go off the cliff, right off the deep end. Maybe this is that where we reframe a missed workout as maybe just a data point of like, okay, we missed today's workout, but we don't make it mean that we are a failure. So this is kind of where we're stepping outside of the story a little bit and we're watching our thoughts kind of go by. A lot of times I visualize my thoughts going down the river on a little raft, and I'm like watching them go by, just watching it go by. I don't have to get in the raft with the thought. I can just watch it go by. I can take a closer look at it if I want to, but I don't have to let it drive. And then this is really where, in that intentional thought work, where that neutral middle ground starts to live. So this is where we're separating ourselves a little bit from our thoughts and our stories. This is that space between where I'm crushing it, I'm doing everything perfectly, and oh my gosh, I'm such a failure. I've completely ruined everything. This is that place where we can really start to observe and think objectively about our thoughts and the stories and decide, what is it that we actually want to do about this? Do we want to edit this? Do we want to keep it as is? Do we need to completely write it all over? And in this mindset piece, this is really where a lot of that most sustainable behavior starts to actually happen, starts to actually occur, because we're changing the way that we think about specific circumstances, which then change how we feel and then ultimately ends up influencing our action and the way that we behave around it. Now, the background story layer can be harder to change than the surface layer, and that's okay, right? It's like those stories have maybe been on repeat for years and years and years. So don't get frustrated if you're like, oh my gosh, why does this keep coming up? Right? It's like we don't have to resolve all of our deep beliefs before we can go and move into more of that active kind of surface level thought work. The surface work, if we're doing that consistently, it ends up actually gradually updating the background story as well. And so that's where all of this stuff starts to just kind of move in this bi-directional loop. Now, the third pillar of the behavior triad is, of course, the behavior. This is the action. This is the one where I think a lot of times by default, we try to just go and do all of the work here. Like, let's just fix the behavior. Let's just apply, more restriction, or let's just apply more willpower, more discipline. Behavior is by far going to be the most visible layer, which is why I think this is where people want to focus first, right? This is, what are we eating? How often are we working out? Let me fix my schedule. Let me fix all of the behavior. But if we don't address the other two pieces that we've already talked about, then that's where things end up not sticking long term. Because, while behavior and the actions absolutely do matter, behavior without the other two layers is literally us just trying harder, trying to use more willpower, and it works until it doesn't. So, what makes behavior stick is when it's connected to both that identity. So, what are we believing about ourselves, as well as the mindset? What's the story? What's the subconscious things that we're believing? How are we actively kind of coming in and interrupting that pattern? When action feels more of just like this natural expression of who you are, rather than this like performance that you're having to maintain, that is where it starts to really stick and become that long-term thing. When the mindset work is there to catch you on the hard days, so like if you miss one workout, you're able to reframe, kind of interrupt those negative thoughts or those stories that might come into play. That one missed workout doesn't then become like this chain of 2 weeks where we just like completely abandoned the whole entire plan, and then we find ourselves starting over again. Now, the other thing I want to say about behavior is this, is that when we're talking about consistency, because yes, in order to build the identity, in order to bolster the mindset work, we do need to take action in the direction that we want to go. We need to make those little tiny deposits or those little tiny votes for who we want to be, the results that we want to create, but that consistency does not mean perfection, right? So being consistent does not equal doing it 100% of the time. It means showing up in the best way that you can in each moment by moment and casting that tiny vote for what it is that you want, even when that form is smaller than usual, right? So it's like you might have some days where you can swing for the fences, feels like you're completely crushing it in every single area. And then you might have some days or some weeks where, man, I'm really lucky if I can just hit that minimum baseline. But at the end of the day, we're still taking those small actions to cast the vote for the results, the identity, and the lifestyle that we're really working toward. So it's just doing what you can do. Is it a 10-minute walk? If that's what you can manage on a day where life is feeling so crazy, that's not a failure. That's still a win. That's still you casting that vote for like, I'm someone who shows up for myself. I'm someone who keeps my word. I'm someone who, moves my body, whatever those identity statements are that you are working on. So again, looking for what are all the ways that we can take action and have our behavior confirm that identity. This is the proof that you are going to give yourself that you are in fact that person, right? So this is the evidence that your brain is looking for to start creating these new stories and this new identity. So how do all three of these work together? So what we want to understand about these three elements again is that they don't necessarily work in kind of this clean straight line. They work in a loop, and every single element, the identity, the mindset, the behavior, they all influence and impact the others. A small behavior can confirm a piece of our identity. A stronger identity is going to make it easier to do the behavior again. Mindset catches you when maybe that loop gets interrupted, or it keeps you from turning one hard day into a mega spiral and holds that identity steady until your behavior can either catch back up or until your behavior is consistent enough that it's like, oh yeah, this is just who I am. This is just what I do. This is just how we show up. When all three are working together, we stop needing motivation and willpower as our daily resource. We stop white knuckling it and just feeling like we have to just try harder and do it more perfectly. And really, you just kind of step into living in this alignment with who you've decided intentionally to be in your life. And on the days that that's hard, this is where we do that mindset work to kind of bridge the gap, to sort of figure out, okay, what's going on here? Why am I struggling with this? What specific thought or identity pattern maybe needs to be updated? And this is really what moves us out of that all or nothing thinking, because in the triad, when all three of these things are online and firing, a hard day or even a hard week does not have to break the loop intention or indefinitely. It's just maybe one blip or one moment inside of that. So if we don't attack behavior change from all three of these sides, all three of these elements, if we keep relying on our willpower and our motivation as our primary strategy, what we know will stay true is everything that's been happening every time we've approached it that way in the past. We keep cycling through, going between being on and off and starting and restopping, maybe having a great couple of weeks, and then a hard week ends up turning into a hard month. And this isn't because you don't care. This isn't because you're not trying. It's not because you don't want it badly enough, but it's because willpower was never really designed to be that long-term system that's going to bolster long-term change. And without having the identity and the mindset layers underneath the behavior has your old identity, your old mindset holding it in place when things get hard. So what can we expect if we're operating with all three of these pieces while we're trying to create long-term change? So when we've got our identity, the mindset, the behavior all working together, you're going to maybe notice that just the experience of working on your goals starts to feel different. Maybe it stops feeling like this thing that you're always trying so hard to do that you have to keep up with. And it just starts to kind of flow and feel more of like an expression of who you are. So, yes, you're still going to have hard days. You're still going to have life happen. You might still have weeks where everything is coming your way, but we don't lose all of our ground, right? Like we have this new place to anchor to. We don't lose ourselves completely or lose all of the progress that we've made because we've got this new, even if it's just a slightly updated identity. We've got the mindset work. So, like actively catching our thoughts, actively working on the story that we're telling ourselves about even those failures that can catch us and sort of keep us from falling all the way into that spiral. So we don't need life to be perfect. We don't even need things to like always go according to plan. It's just when we are approaching change and our life from these three places, we actually become just more resilient and our capacity to handle things increases and changes. So what I would like y'all to focus on this week are three small things. So just one for each of those layers. We've got the identity piece. So we're writing down one sentence that maybe describes who we're becoming. So who are you working on becoming in this season? This is not, this perfect idealized version of you, but who are you right now and what direction are you headed? So maybe it sounds like I'm someone who, and then fill in the blank on that. For the mindset thing, I want you to notice like where that all or nothing is coming if you've got that. We don't have to argue with the thoughts that we're having. We don't have to argue with the story, but even just beginning to notice the stories and naming it can be huge. Just giving it a voice or giving it a name and just saying like, oh, there's that part of my brain again that thinks blah, 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 right? So it's just noticing it, calling it out. That's going to help you start to get a lot more awareness when that is coming up. And then you can step in and intentionally interrupt it with some new thoughts or some new beliefs. And then the last area is that behavior. So it's what is one behavior that is maybe so small that you can't fail at it, but that you could do. So one action that we could take that's a vote for this new identity that we're creating, like this new direction that we're headed. And then maybe start tallying, like when are all of the times that you acted in accordance with that identity to give your brain some proof, give it some dopamine, because that's going to send your brain on this mission to go find more ways to do that thing because it just got rewarded by recognizing, oh yeah, we're doing it, right? We're in the process and we're getting it done. So it doesn't have to be this big, huge change, but what's one small thing that you can do today and then hopefully, tomorrow, the next day, or multiple times, that's a vote for who it is that you want to be. So that's what we have for you this week. Again, the behavior triad, it's all three of those things. It's the identity or the self-concept. It's the mindset, which has those two parts. What are those automatic stories that we're telling? What is the active thought work that we're doing to come in and interrupt the stories? How are we editing or rewriting those? And then what's the behavior that supports both the identity and maybe the new stories that we are wanting to write and create for ourselves that align with the goals? When we approach our habit change and our lifestyle goals or the things that we're working on from those places, it becomes so much easier to stay consistent because, again, we're not relying on willpower or motivation. So that's what I have for you today in this lesson. I hope that this gives you something to kind of chew on and think about. Of course, if you have any questions, again, you can always drop those in the comments section in our group. I will have some resources attached for you as well in the community. So if you want to have those as kind of a recap of what we talked about, maybe some additional sort of workbook questions that you can go through to kind of process, that will be yours inside underneath the post for this as well. So thank you guys so much for showing up for this and investing in yourself. And I promise you, approaching your lifestyle change from this way is so much less exhausting. It actually allows you to have a little bit of fun in the process because we all know it's about enjoying the process and not just being, in a race to get to the finish line, because by the time we get there, we've already set another goal way further out. And this really is kind of the fastest way to actually get yourself to the goals that you have is by approaching it from this three-prong way rather than trying to just force change from the outside in. So grab your resources. If you've got questions, drop those in. Otherwise, thanks again for tuning in this week, and we'll be back next week with another topic. That's a wrap on today's episode. I hope the behavior triad gives you a framework you'll actually come back to, especially on the hard weeks when willpower feels like it's the only option. If this resonated with you and you want to go deeper, this is exactly the kind of work I do with my clients. You can learn more by going to thestrongherway.com. Every week, we are tackling the mindset, the nutrition, the movement, all of it together because truthfully, none of it works in isolation. You can learn more or apply for coaching at thestrongherway.com. And if you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you would share it with another woman in your life who needs to hear it too. All right, I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for hanging out. Bye.